everyone, welcome to the Sam Fury Show. In this episode, Sam from samfury.com and Aventuras from sfnonfictionbooks.com discuss another episode of the Huberman Lab entitled How to Increase Your Emotional Intelligence with Dr. Mark Brackett.
All right, get ready to dive deep because today we're tackling emotional intelligence. You've been doing some research on this, and we're here to help you sort through everything.
You know, it's funny how people think emotional intelligence is just about keeping your cool, but it's really about harnessing those emotions, not just keeping them bottled up.
Yeah, totally. Seems like you're interested in how understanding your emotions can lead to a more fulfilling life, maybe even more success in your career or personal life. And you've been looking into Dr. Mark Brackett's work, right? Especially that ruler model.
Yeah, Dr. Brackett's ruler model is super interesting. It's a framework for actually boosting your EQ, and it breaks emotional intelligence down into 5 steps.
5 steps. Okay, I'm ready. Lay it on me.
All right, so ruler stands for recognizing, understanding, labeling, expressing, and regulating. And they all kind of work together. You know, it's not like you just go through them one by one.
Right, right. Emotions aren't exactly known for being neat and tidy, are they?
Exactly.
So let's start with recognizing. What does that actually look like in real life?
Recognizing is almost like being an emotional detective. You have to be able to identify what you're feeling and also what other people are feeling by paying attention to all the little signals your body, your thoughts, and your behavior are sending out.
So it's not just about saying, oh, I'm angry. It's about noticing what, like, your heart's racing or you're clenching your jaw, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Like, have you ever noticed that you get butterflies in your stomach before a big presentation? Or maybe your hands get clammy when you're nervous about something?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Sometimes I even get a little shaky before a big meeting.
See, that's your body trying to tell you something. It's like a little alarm bell going off in your head saying, hey, pay attention, something's up.
Wow, I never thought of it like that.
And recognizing is also about paying attention to your thoughts, too. Like, are you kind of spiraling with negative thoughts? That can give you some clues about what you're feeling as well.
This is making me realize how much I'm probably missing. Okay, so once you've figured out what emotion you're dealing with, what's the next step?
Then comes understanding, which is where it gets really interesting. This step is all about asking yourself, why am I feeling this way? You have to dig a little deeper.
So it's not just, I'm frustrated, but more, I'm frustrated because this project is way behind schedule and I'm feeling overwhelmed.
Exactly. You have to connect the dots between your emotions and what's causing them, whether it's a situation you're in or maybe even just the thought you're having. That's where the power of emotional intelligence really comes in. When you understand why you're feeling a certain way, you can start to manage those emotions better.
This is starting to all come together now. Okay, so what about labeling? It seems like recognizing and understanding would lead right into that.
They totally do. Labeling is all about putting a name to those emotions you've recognized and started to understand. And having a good emotional vocabulary can really help here.
It's like if you only have a few basic colors to paint with, your picture's going to be pretty limited. But if you have a whole palette of colors, you can create something way more interesting and detailed.
That's a perfect analogy. The more nuanced your emotional vocabulary is, the more precisely you can identify and communicate your feelings, both to yourself and to other people. There's actually a lot of research on how important this is. It's called emotional granularity.
Emotional what now?
Emotional granularity. It's basically how well you can tell the difference between very specific emotions instead of just lumping them all into happy or sad.
So instead of just happy, you might say content or joyful, or even grateful, depending on the exact shade of what you're feeling.
Exactly. And it turns out people who are good at this, at having this high emotional granularity, tend to be mentally healthier and have stronger relationships.
Wow, I'd never even heard of that. Super interesting. Okay, so we've covered recognizing, understanding, and labeling. What's next in the ruler model?
Expressing. And this one can be a little tricky because you have to navigate the social side of emotions.
I can see how that gets complicated. We all know those people who just blurt out whatever they're feeling, no filter whatsoever.
Right. And then there are those who just keep everything bottled up inside and never express how they're feeling at all. The key is finding that sweet spot, being authentic, but also being respectful.
So it's not just about venting, but about communicating in a healthy way, taking the other person's perspective into account too.
You nailed it. It's about being assertive, but not aggressive, being honest without being hurtful. It's about using your voice in a way that strengthens your relationships, not damages them. And, what's fascinating is that research suggests the way we express our emotions can actually change how we feel.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying that just by changing how I talk about my feelings, I can actually change the feelings themselves?
That's what the research suggests. It's like if you're anxious and you keep telling yourself, I'm so stressed, I can't handle this, you're just making those feelings of anxiety worse. But if you can reframe it and say, okay, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed right now, but I've got this, I can handle it, you're changing your mindset and actually starting to regulate those emotions.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. It seems like we have more control over our emotions than we realize. Okay, so we're at the final step now. Regulating. Tell me more about what that involves.
Regulating is about managing those big emotions,
Yeah.
especially the ones that can throw us off track so we can respond thoughtfully instead of just reacting on impulse. It's about having tools and strategies to deal with all the ups and downs of life.
So it's not about ignoring your emotions, but more like having those healthy coping mechanisms in place so those emotions don't end up controlling you.
Exactly. Think of it like this. Emotions are like waves. They come and go. Sometimes they're small and calm, and other times they're huge and powerful. What we need to do is learn how to surf those waves, not get wiped out by them.
I love that analogy. Makes total sense. So what are some of the tools we can use to get better at regulating our emotions?
Well, there are tons of techniques out there, from mindfulness and meditation to deep breathing exercises and cognitive reframing. But, before we get into all of that, I actually had a really interesting question that came up while I was looking through your materials.
Ooh, I like where this is going. Hit me with it.
Okay, so we've been talking about all the ways emotional intelligence can benefit you personally, which are obviously huge. But what about the impact on society as a whole? Imagine a world where everyone had the skills to understand and manage their emotions, to communicate effectively, to empathize with others.
That is a world I would love to live in.
Yeah.
Less conflict, more understanding, a deeper connection between people. It almost sounds utopian, doesn't it?
It does. And while it might seem like a far-off dream, I truly believe it all starts with individuals. The more each of us works on our own emotional intelligence, the more we contribute to that collective shift.
That's a beautiful thought. Okay, before we get too carried away with utopian visions, let's bring it back to those practical techniques you mentioned. We covered the ruler model, but how do we actually put those steps into action? You mentioned mindfulness. Could you say more about that?
For sure. Mindfulness practices like meditation can be incredibly powerful for boosting your EQ. But it's not just about sitting on a cushion and chanting Om. It's really about cultivating present moment awareness, which is so important for recognizing your emotions as they come up.
So it's about paying attention to what's going on inside you without judgment,
Yeah.
instead of getting lost in thoughts about the past or worries about the future.
Yes, exactly. And the great thing about mindfulness is that it's a skill you can develop with practice. You can start with just a few minutes each day, focusing on your breath or noticing the sensations in your body. And as you get more aware of what's going on inside you, you'll start to pick up on those subtle emotional cues we talked about earlier. You'll literally become more in tune with your feelings.
This is already making me feel more centered just thinking about it. Okay, so mindfulness is one tool in our EQ toolkit. What other techniques can we use?
Well, another one that works really well with mindfulness is self-reflection. It's about taking the time to think about your emotional responses in different situations, to try and figure out the patterns and what triggers those emotions.
So it's like being your own emotional scientist, observing your reactions and trying to figure out what makes you tick.
Exactly. And there are so many ways to do this. You can keep a journal, talk to a therapist, or even just have honest conversations with friends or family you trust. The important thing is to create that space for reflection, to really dig into your emotional world.
And speaking of digging deeper, what about that emotional vocabulary we talked about earlier? How can people learn to use more specific words to describe what they're feeling?
That's a great question. It might seem simple, but just being more aware of the subtle differences between emotions can make a big difference. It's like learning a new language. The more words you know, the better you can communicate.
So instead of just saying, I feel bad, I could say I feel discouraged or I'm feeling disappointed, depending on the nuance of what I'm experiencing.
Exactly. And there are actually a lot of great resources out there that can help you expand your emotional vocabulary. There are even apps and websites that have emotion wheels and dictionaries to help you figure out exactly what you're feeling.
That's awesome. I'm definitely going to check those out.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about mindfulness, self-reflection, and expanding our emotional vocabulary. Are there any other key techniques we should touch on before we wrap up this part of our deep dive?
Yes. Let's shift gears and talk about how we understand the emotions of others. It's amazing how we often get so caught up in our own emotions that we forget about how much other people's emotions affect us too. Have you ever, walked into a room and could just feel the tension, like something was off?
Oh yeah, totally. Like you could just sense that something happened, even if nobody's actually saying anything.
Exactly. That's actually something called emotional contagion. It's this crazy phenomenon where we pick up on and absorb, like unconsciously, the emotions of the people around us. It's kind of like emotions are contagious.
So you're saying if I'm hanging out with someone who's like super stressed out, I might start to feel stressed out too, even if I was totally fine before.
Exactly. And the opposite is true too. If you're around people who are happy and upbeat, you're more likely to feel that way too. Their good vibes kind of rub off on you.
That makes a lot of sense.
Hmm.
It explains why I always feel so much more energized after spending time with certain friends. They just have this positive energy that's like infectious.
Right. And what's even cooler is that emotional contagion works both ways. We don't just receive other people's emotions, we also transmit them. So the more we can cultivate positive emotions in ourselves, the more we can spread that positivity to other people.
That's a really cool thought. It's like we have a responsibility to manage our emotions, not just for ourselves, but for the people around us too.
Exactly. And this brings us to two really important skills for understanding the emotions of others: active listening and empathy.
I've definitely heard those terms before, but I'm not always sure I know the difference. Can you break it down for me?
Yeah, for sure. Active listening is about really focusing on what the other person is saying, both what they're saying out loud and what their body language is telling you.
Yeah.
It's about putting your own thoughts and judgments aside and just trying to see things from their perspective.
So it's not just about waiting for your turn to talk, but about really being present and engaged with what the other person is communicating.
Exactly. It's about listening with your whole being, paying attention to their words, their tone of voice, their body language, everything.
That sounds hard. It makes me realize how often I'm probably only half listening, with my mind already thinking about what I want to say next.
We all do it. But with practice, we can all become more aware and attentive listeners. And what's really interesting is that active listening isn't just about understanding someone's words, it's about understanding their emotions too.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because sometimes what people say and what they're feeling don't actually match up. Like
Yeah.
someone might say they're fine, but their body language is telling you they're actually really upset.
Exactly. That's where empathy comes in. Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person. It's about putting yourself in their shoes and imagining how they're feeling.
So it's like going beyond just hearing their words and actually feeling what they're feeling.
Exactly. It's about tapping into that shared human experience of emotions. And the research actually shows that empathy can have a huge impact on our relationships and even our physical health.
Wait, seriously, empathy can make you healthier.
That's what the research shows. When we practice empathy, our brains release oxytocin, which is often called the love hormone or the cuddle hormone. Oxytocin has tons of benefits, like reducing stress, lowering blood pressure, and even boosting our immune system.
I had no idea. That's amazing. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here today. The ruler model: mindfulness, self-reflection, emotional vocabulary, active listening, empathy, even the health benefits of oxytocin. Is there anything else we should touch on before we move on?
Well, one thing I find really interesting is how emotional intelligence connects to our overall well-being.
For sure. It seems like it would play a huge role in our mental and emotional health, maybe even our physical health too.
It definitely does. And I think one of the most important parts of emotional intelligence is being able to reframe how we think about emotions.
Can you say more about that? I'm always fascinated by how powerful reframing can be.
I think a lot of times we're taught to think of some emotions as good and others as bad, but the truth is, all emotions are important. They give us information about ourselves and the world around us.
So even the so-called negative emotions like anger or sadness or fear, they have a purpose.
Absolutely. There's signals that something needs our attention. Like, anger might be telling us that someone crossed a boundary. Sadness might be telling us we need to process a loss or a disappointment. Fear might be warning us about a potential danger.
It's like they're messengers trying to help us, not enemies we need to fight off.
Exactly. And when we start seeing them that way, we can approach them with curiosity and compassion. Instead of trying to push our emotions away, we can listen to what they're trying to tell us and respond in a healthy way.
That's a much better way to deal with emotions. It takes away all the shame and judgment.
Right. And when we stop judging ourselves for our emotions, we can start to understand them and manage them better.
This whole conversation makes me want to go back and try out some of those techniques we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Like mindfulness and self-reflection seem even more powerful now that I have this new perspective on emotions.
I agree. The more we understand our emotions, the more we can use those tools to build our emotional intelligence.
It's like we're building a foundation of self-awareness and then adding all these layers of skills and understanding on top of it.
That's a great way to think about it. And as we keep building that foundation, it's important to remember that emotional intelligence is a journey, not a destination. There's always more to learn and more ways to grow.
That's a good reminder. It takes the pressure off, you know?
Yeah,
We don't have to be perfect. We just have to keep trying to get better.
exactly. It's about progress, not perfection.
And even small steps forward can make a huge difference in our lives and in the world around us.
Absolutely. Which brings us back to that question we were talking about before. What would the world be like if everyone was more emotionally intelligent?
It's definitely a question worth thinking about. The possibilities for positive change are huge.
They really are. And it all starts with each one of us.
So listeners, we encourage you to keep thinking about that question. As we head into the last part of our deep dive, we'll be exploring some more insights and talking about specific things you can do to cultivate your emotional intelligence.
Stay tuned. There's a lot more to come.
Okay, we're back for the last part of our deep dive on emotional intelligence, and I'm ready for more.
Me too. It really is incredible when you realize how much our emotions affect everything we do, like our relationships, our work, everything.
Right. And you mentioned earlier how valuable emotional intelligence is at work. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, looking at the research you've been into, it seems like emotional intelligence isn't just good for, personal growth. It's actually a key ingredient for being a good leader and working well in teams.
That makes sense. If you're good at understanding and managing your own emotions, you're probably going to be better at navigating those tricky team dynamics at work.
Exactly. Plus, emotionally intelligent leaders are better at inspiring their teams, building those strong relationships, and creating a more positive and productive work environment.
It's kind of like that emotional contagion we were talking about before, but on a bigger scale.
Hmm.
If the leader is positive and enthusiastic, it's going to affect the whole team, right?
Totally. And this isn't just for leaders, it's for anyone who wants to be successful at work. Think about it. Almost every job requires you to work well with others, communicate effectively, handle disagreements without, things getting out of control.
It's true. You can't really get away from that in any job. You need emotional intelligence for pretty much any profession.
Yeah, you really do. And one specific area where emotional intelligence can make a huge difference is in conflict resolution.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, disagreements happen everywhere, but it's how you deal with them that matters.
Exactly. Emotionally intelligent people are less likely to get defensive or lash out when there's a conflict. Instead, they can stay calm and try to understand the other person's perspective, which can help everyone, calm down and find a solution that works.
It's like they have that extra bit of awareness to step back from the situation, even when things are getting heated, and see the bigger picture.
Exactly. And that ability to stay in control of your emotions, even when things are tough, that's important for all kinds of challenging situations, not just conflicts at work.
This whole conversation has been so eye-opening. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of how emotions work and how I can use them to, live a better life.
I'm glad to hear that. And, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to encourage you to keep learning about this stuff. Keep exploring the world of emotional intelligence.
It's not something you just learn once and you're done, right?
Right.
It's a lifelong journey.
Exactly. And there's so much out there to help you too. Books, podcasts, workshops, even apps, all sorts of things that can help you understand more and build your EQ skills.
It's empowering to know that we can actually get better at this. It's not like we're just stuck with whatever level of emotional intelligence we have. We can actually do something about it.
Absolutely. And it's not just about improving our own lives, it's about making the world a better place too. Remember that question we keep coming back to. What if everyone was more emotionally intelligent?
What a great thing to think about. Imagine a world with more compassion, more understanding, more connection between people.
It would be amazing. And it starts with each of us taking responsibility for our own emotional growth.
So, to wrap things up, we encourage all of you listening to take what you've learned today and start using it. Pick one thing that really resonated with you and commit to practicing it, even just a little bit every day. Maybe it's mindfulness or active listening or reframing your thoughts, whatever speaks to you.
Even small changes can make a big difference over time. Remember, progress over perfection.
So true. And as you continue on this journey of emotional discovery, we wish you all the best. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been great talking about this with you.
Thanks for tuning in to The Sam Fury Show. If you found this episode useful, let us know with a like, follow, and share. Also, if you haven't already, be sure to visit samfury.com to get free access to all our original summaries, which you can download as PDFs, as well as other exclusive content. It's all completely free at samfury.com.